Hello everyone, and this video will go over factoring trinomials. Okay, so this time we're going to start with trinomials in the form of x squared plus bx plus c. Okay, and that's basically saying that there's no value in front of the x squared other than 1. Okay, and your b and c are just numbers. Okay, so these are the steps that we're going to use to solve or factor our trinomials. Okay, so your first step is you're going to identify your b and c value. Okay, that just really means that you're going to say your b is equal to this and your c is equal to that. Okay, now once you do that, your second step is you're going to find two numbers where if you multiply those two numbers, it would equal to whatever your c is. And if you add those two numbers, it'll equal whatever your b is. Okay, now you're going to get those numbers, and you're going to just place them in the factor x plus or minus whatever the first value is, and x plus or minus whatever the second value is. Okay, the plus or minus all depends on whether these two values are positive or negative. Okay, so whatever the two numbers are from step 2, if it's positive, it'll be x plus that value, and if it's negative, it'll be x minus that value. Okay, so if you're still writing these steps down, please feel free to press pause, but we're going to go ahead to our first example. So let me bring that down a little bit. There we go. Alright, so let's say, for example, if we wanted to factor x squared plus 7x plus 12. And this is the form x squared plus bx plus c, where your b and c are just values. Okay, so the solution here, and I'm just going to go ahead and rewrite it, x squared plus bx plus 7x plus 12. Here, your b is equal to 7. And here, your c is equal to 12. Okay, so that's what we mean by identifying your b and c values. Okay, we know your b is next to the x, so that's why that's 7, and your c is the value all by itself. Okay, so that means we have to find two numbers that multiply to equal c, and those same two numbers add to equal b. Okay, so in this case, we have to find two numbers that multiply to equal our 12, and those same two numbers add to equal 7. Okay, so for 12, we can do 6 times 2, which multiplied equals 12, but it doesn't add to equal 7, so we can't use that one. Okay, we can try 4 times 3. 4 times 3 is 12, and 4 plus 3 is 7. So that's the one we'll use. 4 times 3, and 4 plus 3. Okay. So now we go to our next step, which means we're going to put our x values here. Since this is a positive 4, this is going to be x plus 4. And this is a positive 3, so it's going to be x plus 3. And that's your factor. Alright, and if you do the FOIL method, you'll see you'll end up right back where you started. Alright. Okay, so if you're still writing, press pause, but we're going to go to our next example. Okay, so let's say, for example, you wanted to factor x squared minus 12x plus 35. Okay, now whenever you have a minus sign, that means at least one of your factor values will be negative. Okay, so minus sign means at least factor value or numerical value. To be more specific, numerical value will be negative. Now it could be one, could be both, but at least one will be negative. Okay, so let's go ahead. I'm just going to rewrite it. X squared minus 12x plus 35. So if we identify our B and our C, B equals negative 12. Okay, and C equals 35. Okay, so that means we have to find two numbers that multiply to equal our C and add to equal our B. So we find two numbers that multiply to equal 35, and those same two numbers add to equal negative 12. Okay, now this is one way you can approach this. If you look carefully, whenever you have the multiplication is positive, but the addition is negative, that lets you know that both of these values will be negative, because negative times negative will give you a positive. Okay, but if you add two negatives, you'll get a negative. Okay, so you already know that both of these would have to be negative. You just have to find two values that multiply to give you 35 and add to give you negative 12. Okay, so 35, we can try 7 times 5. Okay, so 7 times 5 is 35, but if you add 7 and 5, you get positive 12. So we'll just make both of them negative. Negative 7 and negative 5 will give you positive 35, and negative 7 plus negative 5 will give you negative 12. Okay, so that means as soon as we find the two values, we know it's going to be x plus or minus something, x plus or minus something. So since this is negative 7, it's going to be x minus 7. And since this is negative 5, it's going to be x minus 5. So these plus or minus signs here all depends on what two numbers you pick here. Okay, and again, if you just do the FOIL method, you'll see that it matches up with your original trinomial. Alright, so if you are still writing, please feel free to press pause, but we're going to go ahead and go to our next example. Okay, so in this example, there's a quick note. Okay, now in some cases, you can factor out a value before solving. Okay, and that's where this next example will come in. Okay, so example, if we wanted to factor 3x squared minus 24x minus 60. Now let me straighten out that 3 a little bit, make it a little clearer. There we go. Okay, so 3x squared minus 24x minus 60. Alright, so the thing about this one is, it actually can be converted to x squared plus bx plus c form. Okay, so if it's x squared plus bx plus c form. Oh. And write our little solution there. Alright, so if I rewrite our original equation, expression, since there's no equal sign, it's not an equation just yet. Okay, so instead of 3x squared, I'm just going to write 3 times x squared. Okay, and instead of negative 24, what if I wrote minus 3 times 8x? And instead of negative 60, what if I wrote it as minus 3 times 20? Okay, this shows that 3, 24, and 60 all have a common factor. You can actually factor out a 3 from all 3 terms. Okay, so if we factor out that 3, we bring it to the front of our parentheses. And we can go ahead and cross it out since we factored it out to the front. So that leaves us with x squared in our first term, minus 8x in our second term, and minus 20 in our third term. Okay, so even if it doesn't start off in the x squared plus bx plus c form, if you factor some problems, not all, but some trinomials, you can create an x squared plus bx plus c form. Alright, so let me move that up a little bit. So here, we have b equals negative 8, and c equals negative 20. Okay, so that means just for this section, we have to find 2 numbers that multiply to equal our c, which is negative 20, and those same 2 numbers add to equal our b, which is negative 8. Alright, so we have to think about that. So for negative 20, since our multiplication is negative, we know that 1 has to be positive and 1 has to be negative. Because they have to have different signs if they multiply and give you a negative number. Okay, now we can always look at what we add. If that's negative, then that means from the 2 numbers we multiply to get negative 20, the larger number will be negative. Okay, because when you add them together to get a negative number, the larger absolute value would have to be negative. Okay, so we can try 5 times 4. Okay, so if you tried 5 times 4, or negative 5 and positive 4, or positive 5 and negative 4, you'll get the negative 20, but no combination of adding those together will give you negative 8. Okay, so what if we try 10 and 2? Okay, so if we try negative 10 and positive 2, we get negative 20, but negative 10 and positive 2 added together will also give us our negative 8. So that's what we're going to go with. Negative 10 times 2 is negative 20, and negative 10 plus 2 is negative 8. Okay, so that means we're going to have the answer. Give yourself a little bit of space here, and I'll show you why in a second. X and x. So you have negative 10, so that'll be x minus 10, and positive 2, so that's x plus 2. Okay, now it doesn't matter if you put the x plus 2 and then x minus 10, it doesn't matter which order you go in. Okay, and the reason I said leave a little bit of space here is because we can't forget that 3. It didn't just disappear. So we have to remember to bring our factored value in front. Okay, now this will be your final answer. And again, if you had x plus 2 and x minus 10, it doesn't matter because multiplication is associative. You can move it, commutative, you can move it anyway. Okay, so if you have 3 times 2, it's the same as 2 times 3. So you can shift multiplication around. So you're good if you did that. Alright, so if you're still writing, please feel free to press pause, but we're going to go ahead and go to our next example. Alright, bring that down a little bit. There we go. All right, so let's say, for example, we wanted to factor n squared plus 18n plus 65. Okay, so you can see here the variable can change from x to n to s to r. It doesn't have to always be x. But we're still looking for the n squared plus bn plus c. We just changed the x to n, but it's the exact same form. Okay, so if you see an r instead of an x, no need to panic, it's the exact same thing. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and solve this one. So if we have our n squared plus 18n plus 65, we see here that our b is equal to 18 and our c is equal to 65. Alright, so just to kind of give an idea of how you can approach this, if you think along the lines of your factors of your c, which is 65, you have factors of 65 and sum of the factors. Okay, now this would help you if you couldn't really figure out where to start. Okay, so if you list all of your factors of 65, you have 65 times 1, and you have 13 times 5. Okay, I'm pretty sure you figured out which one you can use for this one already, but we'll go ahead and go through the steps. So if you do 65 plus 1, you get 66, which is not equal to 18. So can't use that. But if you get 13 plus 5, that's equal to 18, which is your b. So that's the one you want to use. Okay, so whenever you're stuck and you don't know exactly where to start, just make a little chart and factor your c value and say, okay, which one am I going to go with, and just kind of do process of elimination. Okay, so we have two numbers that multiply to equal c. And those same two numbers add to equal b, and we figured out that that's 13 and 5. 13 times 5 is 65, and 13 plus 5 is 18. So we end up with, we make our parentheses there with our n in the first term. It's a positive 13, so we do plus 13. And it's a positive 5, so we're going to make that plus 5. Okay, so that's our factored answer. Okay, so let's go ahead and do another example. If you're still writing, feel free to press pause. Alright, so let's say for this example, we wanted to factor d squared minus 18d plus 56. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and rewrite it. D squared minus 18d plus 56. That shows us that our b is equal to negative 18. And our c is equal to positive 56. Alright, so that means we have to find two numbers that multiply to equal our c. Positive 56, and those same two numbers add to equal our b, which is negative 18. Okay, and once again, pay attention to your positives and negatives, because if you're multiplying these two and it's positive, then that means it has to be a negative times a negative. Because when you add two negatives, you get a negative. When you multiply two negatives, you get a positive. Okay. So again, if you say, okay, I don't know exactly where to start, just make a list of your factors of C. Okay, so your C value is 56. So you want to make factors of 56 and the sum of your factors. Okay, so we've already figured out that they would both have to be negative. Okay, so we can do 56 times 1, or in this case, -1 times -56. Okay, because that's 56. We can do 2 times 28 is 56. So -2 times -28 is 56. We can do -4 times -14. -4 times -14 is 56. Okay, so now if we add those together, -1 plus -56 is -57. Okay, so that's not -18, so we're not going to use that. -2 times -28, if we add them together, that would be -30, which we can't use that because that does not equal -18. Now, -4 times -14, if we add those together, we get -18, which is exactly what we're looking for. Okay, so you can go ahead and use -4, -14, or -14, -4. Doesn't matter which order. Okay, so -4 times -14 is positive 56, and -4 plus -14 is -18. All right, so that means this factor will be D, and we make a D here. That would be D minus 4 times D minus 14. Okay, and that is the factor of that. And again, you can always double check it by just using the FOIL method. All right. Okay, so hopefully this is starting to make some sense. Okay, if you're still writing, feel free to press pause, but we're going to go ahead to our next example. Okay, so what if we wanted to factor y squared plus 95y plus 94? Okay. Actually, I want you to give this one a try. Okay, so go ahead and press pause and give this one a try for yourself. And when you're done, we're going to go ahead and solve it. All right, so assuming you've already worked everything out, y squared plus 95y plus 94, actually these should be the easier ones to do, because whenever you see that your b term is just one more than your c term, you'll see why it should be pretty quick. Okay, so we know b equals 95, c equals 94. Okay, so we have to find two numbers that multiply to equal 94, and those same two numbers add to equal 95. Like I said, whenever you see there's just one difference in the value, the absolute value, you just do 94 times 1 and 94 plus 1. That's why when you see these values, like, okay, the absolute value of those two are just one apart, you can easily go right with that. Okay, so that means you have y, you have a positive 94, so that's plus 94, and you have a positive 1, so it's plus 1. Okay, so you can find little hints every here and there if you know where to look for them. Alright, so if you're still writing, feel free to press pause, but we're going to go to our next example, which is a little bit different. Alright, so let's say, for example, we wanted to factor c squared plus 7cd minus 44d squared. Okay, now this is different because it's not just one x value, or I mean one variable. You have two variables here. You have a c squared for your first term, and you have a d squared in your last term. Alright, so I'm going to give you a quick note whenever you run across a trinomial like that. Okay, so since the first term has a c squared, okay, so it's a c squared in the first term, and the last term has a d squared, the factor will have the form okay, so it will look just like this. Your first term will have the c, your last term will have the d, and it'll be plus or minus depending on whether or not it's positive or negative, but then you'll have a numerical value in front of the d. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and start solving, and I'll show you exactly what I mean. Okay, so if we have c squared plus 7cd minus 44d squared, in this case you go right to what we did before, where your b is equal to 7 and your c is equal to negative 44. Okay, so now let's say, okay, I'm stuck, I don't know which values to look at because we have two numbers that multiply to equal negative 44 and two numbers that add to equal 7. Okay, so again, if you're ever stuck and you don't know exactly where to get started or how to get started or which direction to go, always make your little box somewhere and look at all of your factors of c. Okay, so we have factors of negative 44, which is the same as factors of positive 44. Factors of negative 44. And the sum of the factors. Okay. So we're just going to look at the positives to start off, and then we're going to switch between positive and negative. So we have 44 times 1. So we can make that negative. And then we have positive 44 times negative 1. Okay, so you have 22 times negative 2. And you have negative 22 times 2. Okay, so you have negative 4 times 11. And you have 4 times negative 11. Alright, so we have all of our different factors of negative 44. Okay, so if you add these two together, Negative 44 plus 1, that's negative 43, which does not equal positive 7, so that can go away. You have 44 plus negative 1. You add those together, you get positive 43, which is not 7, so that goes away. You have 22 times negative 2. If you add those together, you get positive 20. And again, that's not negative 7, so that goes away. If you have negative 22 plus 2, if you add those together, you get negative 20, which is not positive 7, so that goes away. So if you have negative 4 times 11, as soon as you add those together, you get positive 7, which is exactly what we're looking for. So you don't use any of these here, but you finally hit the jackpot with that one. Okay. So again, sometimes you'll be able to look right at it and figure it out, and sometimes you may say, okay, I don't know where to start. This is always a really good direction to start with. Okay, kind of help guide you in that direction there. Alright, so we know we have negative 4 and positive 11. So negative 4 times positive 11. Negative 4 plus positive 11. Okay, so both of those are true. Okay, now because we have the C and the D, our answer is going to look like C, C, and our last term is going to be D and D. Okay, so that's going to be C minus 4, D, and C plus 11, D. Okay, so you have C minus 4D and C plus 11D. Okay, and if you did the FOIL method here, you'd end up right back at your original problem. All right. Okay, so we're going to do another example just like this one. All right, so if you're still writing, please feel free to press pause. We're going to go ahead and do another example with two variables. Okay, so let's say, for example, you want to factor, let me write out the actual directions, factor x squared plus 27xy minus 58y squared. Okay, now if you think you're ready, you can press pause and try to solve this one yourself. Alright, so if you did press pause and try this one yourself, we're going to go ahead and solve it. But remember, this is just like the previous one. Okay, so we have two variables. So now, since we have an x squared in the first term, since we have an x squared in the first term, and a y squared in the second term, or in the last term, our factor will look like this. Okay, so it'll be just the basic two sets of parentheses. Our x squared is in the first term, so we'll have x and x. And since our last term has a y squared, it'll be y and y. Okay, now it'll be plus or minus, depending on if it's positive or negative, but there will be a numerical value in front of the y. Okay, we just have to figure out what that numerical value is. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and solve it. So if we have x squared plus 27xy minus 58y squared, just like before, our b is equal to 27, and our c is equal to negative 58. Okay. So again, if you're not sure where to get started, just look at all of your factors of c. Okay, so in this case, c is negative 58. So our factors of negative 58, and then the sum of factors. Okay, so we can try negative 58 and 1 and 1 and negative 58. We don't have to because it's not a difference of 1, but we'll try it anyway. So negative 1 times 58. If we add those together, we get positive 57, which is not what we're looking for. Forgot to do this part. Sorry about that. Two numbers that multiplied equal negative 58, and two numbers that add equal 27. Okay, I try to keep the same process throughout, because if you have the same process, you know you've covered all your bases. Okay, so we can try 1 times negative 58. We end up, if we add them together, negative 57, which is not what we're looking for. Okay, we can try negative 2 times positive 29. We add those together, we get positive 27, which is exactly where we need it to be. Okay, so we can actually stop right there, because once you find the two numbers that, when you add them together, give you your b value, you can stop. You don't have to keep going. Okay, so you have negative 2 and positive 29. So negative 2 and positive 29 multiply to give you negative 58. And negative 2 and positive 29 add to give you positive 27. Okay, now remember, we have our x and y in our original expression. So if we're going to factor, our first term is going to have the x. Our last term is going to have the y. So you have minus 2, so that'll end up being minus 2y. And positive 29, so plus 29y. Okay, so you have x minus 2y and x plus 29y. So if you do the FOIL method, you'll end up right there. And that's your factor. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and do one more example like this one. Okay, if you're still writing, feel free to press pause. We're going to go ahead and move on now. Okay, so let's say, for example, we want to factor u squared minus 25uv plus 46v squared. Oh, move that back up a little. Okay, so I want you to give this one a try. So go ahead and press pause. Try to work this one out like the previous two examples. And when you come back, we'll go on this one. Alright, so I'm assuming you've pressed pause, you've worked it out, you're ready. So we're going to go ahead and solve this one. Okay, now you have a u squared in the first term and a v squared in the last term. Okay? Okay, so we'll have the form. Remember, you're going to have your two sets of parentheses. A u in the first term is going to be a v in the last terms. Like I said, in plus or minus, depending on whether it's positive or negative. And there will be some unknown number in front of the v. You haven't figured that part out yet. Alright. So I'm going to go ahead and rewrite it. So u squared minus 25uv plus 46v squared. Okay, so we know that our b is equal to negative 25. And our c is equal to 46. Okay, so once again, if you're ever confused on where to get started, you know you have to find two numbers that multiply to equal your c, and those same two numbers add to equal negative 25. And again, look at the fact that when you multiply them together, it's positive, but when you add them, it's negative. So you know these two would have to be negative in order to multiply and become positive. All right. So again, we have our factors of c. Now, since we know they both have to be negative, it keeps us from having to do all the different combinations. So we have factors of 46, and then the sum of factors. So let me straighten that up a little bit to look more like an A. There we go. Okay, so we know they both have to be negative, so negative 46 and negative 1. If we add them together, that's negative 47, so that's not going to be used. Okay, we have 46 divided by 2 is 23, so we have negative 23 times negative 2. If you add those together, you get negative 25, which is exactly what we need. So we know we're going to use that one. Okay, so negative 23 times negative 2 is positive 46. And negative 23 plus negative 2 is negative 25. Okay, so again, we know that it's going to be in this form. Okay, so we go ahead and write our parentheses. We have our u in our first term, and we're going to have our v in our last term. We have minus 23 minus 2, so minus 23 and minus 2. Okay, so it's u minus 23v times u minus 2v. Or if you want to switch it around and have a u minus 2v times u minus 23v, that's correct also. Okay, so that would be your answer. Alright, so hopefully this helped, and I will see you on the next video.